Paul, thank you for the super chat. I think Memra was first in the Old Testament Psalms, so at 500 BCE, close to when logos was used in Greece, which developed from the Vedic Persian Asha. Thoughts on that, anyone?
I mean, Memra is just a pretty standard, yeah, I don't have a lot to say about it.
Daniel Boyarin, who's a fantastic rabbinic scholar, has an article on this. I think it's in the beginning was the Memra, but Memra, if I'm not mistaken, is not a Hebrew word. It's something used in rabbinic Aramaic.
It's Aramaic,
or in the
in the Targum.
In the Targums. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm not sure you could date that to 500 BCE, but I do definitely think you can date Chokmah, which is Hebrew wisdom, to probably about that time. And yeah, I would really put the emphasis on her as being another great antecedent. I think that, again, I'd be the last to say that, you know, to draw any kind of firm line between Jewish and Greek thought, but yeah, without her, without that piece, the Christian logos doesn't make sense. And I'll just remind people that, you know, when you look at early Christians, yes, we remember John's prologue, but we forget that, you know, the Simonians, who were just as much Christian as Justin Martyr with his logos, were promoting Helen as the wisdom of God, whom they called not logos but enea, or apenia, which is the Greek for thought. And so there were Christians who were promoting wisdom in all her feminine beauty and glory, which taps, I think, has more resonance with the Jewish, what might be thought of as native Jewish thought. But yes, it's the logos that won out. But I think that was a hard-won battle. Yeah, the part of 4th century history with Athanasius.
Wow, that was an interesting comment, Paul. Thank you for that. And anyone else want anything else want to add to that?
Yeah, just to say that the Aramaic translation of onkelos is really much later.
Sure.
So yeah, I also I just think it's a function of Indo-European languages, right? Like when you look at Indo-European ontology, the way that it develops, and the way that Chinese ontology develops, they develop along very different lines. And a good argument to be made is that it's because their languages work very differently. Like there isn't a Chinese word for being. They just don't talk about that because it's not part of how they talk. And like, you know, we can make a noun into a verb in the way that doesn't make a lot of sense in that. And so I think that when you look at the structures of how languages work, when the Semitic languages and the Indo-European languages like Greek are bumping up against each other, there's a huge translation barrier about how to render a lot of this stuff. And onkelos is really reaching at how to Semiticize a word like the word, like, you know, and it's kind of clumsy how he does it. And I'll give an example of this. It's far afield, but one of my most favorite texts and rendered in modern Hebrew is Spinoza's Ethics. And it is just the most tortured thing to read in modern Hebrew because Spinoza just speaks in a very scholastic kind of Latin that modern Hebrew is not prepared to deal with. And it is interesting trying to look at how that works and how it doesn't work. And ditto with someone like onkelos or, you know, I always imagine what would it look like to translate, you know, Philo into Hebrew, like into Mishnaic Hebrew. And
it's been done. He's in modern Hebrew now.
He's in modern Hebrew. I can imagine modern Hebrew. But
Wow.
trying to imagine Philo translated into Mishnaic Hebrew,
right?
Like it breaks the mind how they would do it. But I suppose that, you know, one could do it.
Wow, interesting stuff. Then that. Oh, so Beck, you got anything you want to say about that, or?
Yeah, I just have one more thing to add. Just listening to this great conversation, it reminds me also, and I think a good example and a nice little comparison is when you think of something like the Chaldean oracles and Hecate's role in that kind of trinity. Like if you think about it, like she's Hecate, or the world soul. It's kind of like the same thing. It's not the same thing, obviously, but the logos, and then the Hebrew concepts of wisdom that you find. So I just wanted to add that.
Nice. That's a good point. Good point. Thank you for that. And Ted Francis, another person who I see all the time here, and you guys make this fun. You guys really do make this fun. But I do know that it's short on time, so we'll get through these pretty quickly. Thank you for the super chat. How much do Dionysus and Osiris overlap?
Same dude. If you're talking to Plutarch, yeah.
Oh wow, right to it.
Yeah.
And Herodotus.
Yeah, I mean, it's a debate. When the Greeks are interpreting their gods as the Egyptian gods, they don't think of, just like a Christian missionary would, like, in the 16th century would go to South America, and they would hear about the native, I don't know, gods of the Native
Quetzalcoatl and Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they would try to interpret those in terms of their own system of thought, which unfortunately for Christians usually involves demonizing the other deities. But the Greeks didn't do that, and they really tried to interpret the gods they met on foreign soil as versions of the gods they knew, the powers that they knew. And Dionysus, they viewed Osiris as Dionysus, because Dionysus could go back and forth, was known to go back and forth from the underworld. He was known to have died. He was associated with fertility, particularly with the vine, and Osiris, is the one who brings up the crops, because Osiris, or the semen of Osiris, is the Nile and its flood. He's very much associated with fertility. But obviously, the stories don't fully overlap by any means, and the Greeks aren't stupid about that. I mean, they are different stories, different narratives told, but they believed on some level that they were the same power, and that different stories about the same power developed in different lands.
If I'm not mistaken, doesn't Diodorus, is he the one who tries to kind of put the story into one? Or I'm not sure what he does there. I remember reading that.
He tries to use, euhemeristic thought, which is when you historicize the gods and view them as ancient heroes.
Right.
Then what you can do is say that, there was a dude named Dionysus, and he was born in Greece, but he went to Egypt, and that's where the Egyptians pick up on their version. But it doesn't. I mean, I guess you can be the judge of it, but it doesn't quite map out all the time, and you can see a lot of struggle.
What do you think, Dr. Sledge?
I don't have much to add. I'm not, I don't work in Egyptology, but it's
sure.
It's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. That's the answer. Sometimes that's what But thank you for that. And Derek from Myth Vision Podcast. If you don't know what Myth Vision Podcast is, what are you doing these days? You're living under a rock. Go and subscribe to Derek from Myth Vision Podcast. Is it fair to say the usage of logos is outdated in modern philosophy and science? Let's start with you, Dr. Sledge.
I would say that in modern Catholic philosophy, absolutely not. No, not at all.
Wow.
So I would also say that in modern physics, and philosophy of physics, and folks may know this, my background is in philosophy. I'm not a background in religious studies. This is, my background's not, it's in philosophy, just specializing in Western esotericism. But one of the things that's really interesting that's emerged in the past couple of years in modern philosophy of science is a critique of modern physics. And the critique of modern physics goes like this. Modern physics has dedicated itself to certain philosophical principles about nature. One of those is naturalness. One of those is symmetry, or so naturalness and symmetry are aesthetic principles. They're not scientific principles. Nature doesn't have to be symmetrical. It doesn't have to obey the laws of naturalness. And Sabine Hassenfelder has made this point really well. And there's an idea that nature has to be a certain kind of way, that it needs to be symmetrical, it needs to be beautiful, it needs to be that the equations about nature are right if they're elegant. Like elegance is a vision of truth, and so if an equation is elegant and it describes something, then it must be true of reality, whether or not we can prove experimentally that's true at all. And so one of the arguments that's been made is that physics, the philosophy of physics, hasn't made any fundamental progress in the past 60 years because it's tied itself to philosophical ideas around naturalness, elegance, and symmetry. Supersymmetry being an example of this, string theory being an example of this. And one of the arguments that has been made against this is just ancient Greek philosophy. We're assuming the world is reasonable. We're assuming that the world is elegant. We're assuming the world is communicating to us these beautiful beliefs. And if we just tap into the natural symmetry and beauty of things, then we'll fundamentally get it. And because string theory is so elegant and so reasonable, that it must be true. And it might not be true. It might be very well the case that nature is absolutely inelegant and not describable by equations. I don't know if folks have ever done this. Have your folks ever looked at the standard model of physics actually spelled out in the long version? It's an absolute mess of equations. It just looks like it looks like a nightmare of Greek letters. And I think that when you say this, Derek, has the logos survived in modern philosophy and science? My answer is it has, but it shouldn't have had. It's the assumption that nature operates in some kind of logical way, that nature is reasonable, that nature is elegant. That's a really old Greek idea. That's Heraclitus. That's Stoicism, that providence is good and reveals itself to us in a very natural, ordered way. But there's no reason ipso facto to believe that about nature itself. So I would say, Derek, that scientists for the past past 5 decades have been absolutely committed to the idea of the logos, all the while not knowing they were. And it may have derailed the progress of science for decades.
Wow. Interesting. Very, very fascinating answer. I just learned a lot from that. So, Dr. Litwa, anything to add to that?
Not really. I mean, creation and creationism is it's a faith. It's a dogma that you believe a good God has created the world and cares about how many hairs are on your head. That's something that Christians accept by faith, by various other systems accept by faith. It's something that the ancients believed. And yeah, when you look at in antiquity, it's certainly the case that the Stoics were really pushing this. Interestingly, apparently the Aristotelians weren't. That they kind of believed, or at least are often reported as believing, that God's providence ended at the moon. It went down as far as the moon, but then it so that God cared about the moon and up, but what happened on Earth, sort of like anything goes.
Well, you have to get ethics, right? Because you have to have free will and stuff.
Right. But I mean, the idea that God cared for people. I mean, I think many Platonists, would then try to, and Stoics would try to say that that has a scientific meaning, that we would expect the world as we see it to be ordered and predictable, because God is good, and being predictable is good, and good things happening is good, and but what if it's not? I mean, that's a religious belief, and it always will be. Even if you're and don't believe in 7 days of creation. If you believe in a creator deity, you do so. And the question is, can you reconcile that with anything science proposes?
Wow, those are great answers, and some good comments in there too. Wish I could read them all, but we do have some super chats that we got to get through. So really wish we had more time, but that's just how it is right now. Neo Magus, thank you for the super chat. Is the religion of the Magi Mithraic or Zoroastrian? How about Dr. Litwa? I'm just picking random.
Roll the dice.
Yeah. I've only got 5 or 10 minutes, so I'll take a stab at this. Okay. I mean, it depends on when you're asking. Like if you really are interested in ancient Persia, and I think you should be, there were, of course, Magi or Mogon in their language, and these were high officials who did a variety of important tasks in the native religion at the time, which was Zoroastrian. But as you move into the time around the birth of Jesus, and you get into the 2nd and 3rd century, I'm not sure everyone would have made hard and fast distinctions. But yes, historically, the Magi are Zoroastrian priests, and then they magus gets sort of generalized and is used as a term of opprobrium by some Greco-Roman authors to mean just a plain quack or a charlatan of some sort, and then it comes into English as magician. So yeah, this is why I recommend that we not call Simon Magus. I call him Simon of Samaria, because it just creates a kind of confusion, because he has nothing to do with Zoroastrianism, and to call him a magus in the sense of quack, which is what Orthodox Christians have been doing for 2,000 years. I don't really want to replicate that discourse. Mm-hmm. I wish I was enough of an expert on Mithraism to give a really sophisticated answer, but yeah, I can't. And so, in terms of how Magi would function in Mithraic religion, yeah, I'm gonna have to let Justin say what he knows there, if anything.
I think the answer is we don't know. I think that's what I've gleaned from my studies is that that Zoroastrianism, it did in the Sasanian Empire, was a state religion, but the degree to which it was actually I mean, we tend to think of religions as sort of like when they become a state religion, they're coherent and systematic, and there's a pope or something. But it could have been the case that even when the Sasanian period, which is still significant later than the Jesus period, that it was still a bit more diffuse and a bit more elites operating at the very top of society, and not everyone was Zoroastrian or whatever. Many people may not know what that was. So my understanding is that that at least at the time when the gospel was being written, in Matthew, that the Magi still represented especially astrological wisdom, and that the appearance of special stars in the sky were basically meant to be a proof text, and the best people you could bring to bear as people to legitimate that proof were these Magi, who were known for their astrological prowess. And so the idea, I think, that the writer of that text is trying to do is show that there was an astrological sign. To go back to your earlier conversation, Dr. Litwa, there was a sign in the heavens, and that the people best to interpret that sign understood it, and then hightailed it to the meaning of it, and therefore the very stars, and the ritual experts in the ancient world most renowned for interpreting that, verified it. I mean, it's like, imagine if you wanted to prove that a miracle had happened, you called in the best scientists of the day. You got Carl Sagan and Albert Einstein and Copernicus to tell you that it really happened. Well, I think that's what the writer of that text is trying to do. They're bringing in the best ritual experts to be like, yeah, absolutely. and they brought gifts to him. So, of course, the story is mythological, but I think that's what they're trying to do. But the degree to which we can determine what exactly Zoroastrianism looks like in that time period, I think the jury's out.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, there's quite a few super chats left. I don't know. I know Litwa said he was short on time. Sled, are you good to stay for a little while?
Let me check the
Obviously,
time.
and I left the message in the private chat.
I have about half an hour.
Okay, we can run through them then, I guess.
Yeah, about half an hour.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Thank you for that question. I don't know if you have time for one more or not, Litwa, but you can. Obviously, I'm not going to hold you if you don't. If you can.
Yeah, one more or so.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.